Hi there. I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. Very pleased to welcome you to our session entitled A Buyer's Guide to Consider When Assessing a CASB. Your presenter today is Hank Schless. He's Senior Manager of Security Solutions and host of the Endpoint Enigma podcast for Lookout. But before I turn this over to Hank, let me give you a little bit of background. Gartner found CASB to be the fastest growing cybersecurity segment, with investment increasing by 41.2%. It's no surprise then, as security teams turn to CASB to solve new cloud service related challenges that legacy security solutions cannot address. In this session today, you'll learn what to consider when assessing a CASB, the best questions to ask a CASB vendor, what additional integrations make CASBs even more effective, and what compliance-related DLP functionality your CASB should have. A little bit of information about my organization, Information Security Media Group. We're a 15-year-old global education and intelligence firm. We're based in Princeton, New Jersey. You might know us by one of our 34 media properties. These include Bank Info Security, Healthcare Info Security, and Data Breach Today. In all, we reach an audience of 950,000 security leaders around the world, and we give them a daily diet of news, analysis, research, events, and educational opportunities just like this one. Just a few notes of housekeeping. If you should have any questions for Hank during the course of this session, you can submit them anytime. Can't promise we can get to every question, but for those that we don't answer today, we will get responses directly back to you via email. If you should encounter any technical problems while viewing today's webinar, please take down the email address on your screen. If you write to webinars@ismg.io, we do have technical support staff standing by to help. I do also need to let you know that today's webinar is copyrighted material. That means it's meant for today's session and individual study purposes only. If you would like to use any of the information presented today, or if you're looking for customized training materials, please contact us. My pleasure to introduce our sponsor, Lookout. Lookout is an integrated endpoint to cloud security company. Their mission to secure and empower our digital future in a privacy-focused world where mobility and cloud are essential to all we do for work and play. They enable consumers and employees to protect their data and to securely stay connected without violating their privacy or trust. Lookout is trusted by millions of consumers, the largest enterprises and government agencies, and partners such as AT&T, Verizon, Vodafone, Microsoft, Google, and Apple. Headquartered in San Francisco, Lookout has offices in Amsterdam, Boston, London, Sydney, Tokyo, Toronto, and Washington, D.C. To learn more, please visit lookout.com. And of course, I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today. Hank Schless, again, is Senior Manager of Security Solutions with Lookout, and he's host of the Endpoint Enigma podcast. Now, after working for fintech and database technology companies, Hank has found a home in cybersecurity. Before Lookout, he was the 20th employee at a cloud infrastructure security startup and helped the company grow to more than 160 employees. At Lookout, as a senior manager on the security solutions team, he enables internal teams and informs the market about the growing need to secure mobile devices as part of their security strategy. With that, let me turn this over now to Hank Schless. Hank, it's all yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. So I'm really excited to be here today, join everybody to talk about, this pretty important topic. It can be a daunting effort to have to go and understand what something like a CASB can do for your organization, especially when everybody has such unique problems. So we're going to run through a few things today. We're going to look at some of kind of the broader challenges and problems that folks who we talk to tend to try to solve for when it comes to looking for a CASB and understanding how those affect the greater business and their overall cloud security posture as a whole. So, that'll kind of be step one. Then we're going to look into what to consider when assessing a CASB. And again, this is going to be a few different topics because everybody has different priorities, but it'll kind of cover the gamut of what people are thinking, how they're approaching things, and hopefully one or two of those things are applicable to you and you can find them useful. And then, really we want to help you understand what are the good questions to ask a CASB vendor. What are the ways in which you can understand if this is something that's really going to help your business and your goals. And then finally, we'll talk about some key takeaways and address some question and answer towards the end here. So to really hammer on this, I just wanted to look at this quote from Gartner when they were talking about their hype cycle, and they were saying how CASBs are critical for organizations, to secure usage of business critical cloud services. And the 4 key areas which we're going to really focus on today through the course of this, this conversation are visibility, compliance, data security, and threat protection. Really looking at how those all tie together, and again, trying to understand where you can find the most value, out of a CASB as you sort of explore this whole process and take on this journey. So as promised, step 1 here, we're going to talk a little bit about the challenges and problems. So really, I just want people, why do organizations invest in a CASB? There's there tends to be a bit of a 2-step process to it. There's the initial evaluation of what you want to actually, of which solution you want to implement. But then there's also the second step, which is really figuring out, what are the deeper challenges that this solution is going to help me solve. And so, number 1, and probably the one that we all thought was maybe going to go away to a degree, but not forever, but to a degree, and then it came roaring back during the pandemic, was shadow IT. So, this really returned as a major concern during the pandemic. With employees obviously working from anywhere, that goes without saying, but using apps that weren't approved for corporate use, as they work from home, especially if they're using personal devices. I mean, it's natural for people to want to use as few tools as possible. That goes for both personal and work. So if you're kind of loosely sharing data, storing data maybe in a personal Google Drive account or something like that, that can get pretty risky. And the thing is that this can cause these data leaks and breaches due to data moving into these unapproved applications. And on top of that, you also need to be able to figure out a way to be able to maintain the configuration of approved applications. It's enough of a problem worrying about the unapproved ones. When you got the approved ones as well, that becomes a whole other issue. And so this idea of shadow IT became really problematic. And there's actually a great stat I found from G2 where they said that 80% of workers admit to using SaaS applications at work without getting approval from IT. And this is from this past year. And that's pretty, I mean, we're all guilty of it. You want to have control over that application's standing as an admin, but it's inevitable that happens to a degree. So if you can use the CASB to be able to understand where data is going and maybe what unapproved applications may be in use, that's a really good first step. And that's kind of the biggest, I'd say that's probably one of the most common issues that we hear about in the market. But the next one here kind of starts to expand out. So you have your apps, you've got everything in the cloud, you've got these applications that maybe weren't approved for use. And then on top of that, you really need to be able, for the ones that are approved and the ones that employees are using, you really need to be able to make sure you can take the centralized approach to implementing data access policies for employees across all of your SaaS apps. Because the difficulty is that every individual SaaS application or platform, takes a different approach to the native security that it offers. And they do all offer some level of it, but in terms of what you really need, that's going to be in depth. Obviously, you want to be able to make sure that whether it's for the purpose of aligning with compliance policies or standards, if it's internal data handling policies, whatever it may be, you really need to make sure that you are you have a centralized and kind of aligned data access management posture across all of these different applications, despite what they may offer as kind of default security aspects or features to the platform. And again, kind of tying to the shadow IT bit a bit, there was another stat that I saw in this same G2 study saying that the average company has about 975 unknown cloud services. So again, you think about kind of the compound issue and pain that it causes to have to kind of implement these uniform policies across your approved applications. You then throw that in the mix, and now you've got this issue that's compounding out. And the last one, which is really the sort of the broadest, the biggest picture of all of this, is really regaining visibility and control. And this is something that I think a lot of us have heard a fair amount through the course of the pandemic, but even before that, this was something that as SaaS and infrastructure as a service, platforms became more prominent, the idea of that traditional corporate perimeter really started to fade away. And even before everyone, was working either from home or hybrid. I mean, I'm in our office today. But even before then, there was still this idea that control was being lost. And so not having that visibility, you really could be missing out on some of the telltale signs of malicious behavior, and also unintentional insider threats as well. I mean, we all talk about what happens when a malicious actor gets inside your infrastructure, but the reality is that a lot of times data leaks happen unintentionally from the inside. And there was a number from IBM that I saw that said about 60% of organizations had about 20 insider threat incidents per year. Now that obviously can be pretty broad, far-reaching, but at the same time, it's obvious that this is a problem. What are my users doing? How do I understand what their baseline of behavior is, and how do I help kind of drive a more secure organization in the policies that I extend, and the reaction, the mitigation tactics I can take in reaction to those more anomalous behaviors that may be indicative either of somebody on the inside who is intentionally trying to leak some of your data, or unintentionally and just happens to move it to the wrong place or access something they shouldn't, or download too much maybe sensitive compliance data. So now we're going to talk more kind of what you should consider when assessing a CASB. And this is important because it's going to go over some of kind of the broader market guidance about what you need to be thinking about in this sense. So, there are a number of things that a CASB should enable you to do, right? It should help you understand and gain visibility into basically sanctioned and unsanctioned apps, really understand basic user behavior, such as uploading and downloading files, the volume of files that are being downloaded and uploaded, and also just kind of overall assess that cloud risk. The second one, which I talked about a little bit in the previous slide, is really implementing and centralizing these access controls, and more importantly, adaptive access controls. Taking into account the risk of a device or a user trying to access your cloud resources is key, especially as people are continuously working from so many different places and devices. A third one here, identifying and protecting sensitive data with DLP, or data loss prevention technology. This is really, you want to make sure that you can implement this kind of dynamic data access and handling policies. And again, DLP is a critical part of that. And one of those things that any CASB really should be able to help you do, sort of at the minimum. The fourth one here, which can get a little tricky, is really protecting against malware, entering into your SaaS or IaaS apps. This is a way that threat actors will kind of infiltrate the infrastructure and then move laterally, or create a backdoor for further entry. And obviously, we all know that then leads to bigger issues. If they move laterally around the infrastructure, bounce around some other apps, find important data to encrypt, and then suddenly you've got a ransomware attack on your hands. Is a very realistic situation these days, unfortunately. And then finally, really create cloud security posture management policies. So CSPM, or Cloud Security Posture Management, is something that has become kind of a standard for CASBs more recently. This is really to ensure that your cloud services, whether AWS, GCP, Azure, anything in there, they aren't exposed to attacks that give threat actors direct access to valuable data. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't give them any open doors to basically circumvent any other security policies you have in place. You don't want that to happen. So you want to make sure, obviously, that the the foundation of all of this is secure before you're even moving into those applications and looking at that level. So, looking at kind of the minimum is one thing, but you want to also know when a CASB is going to help you do more. And this is really where, I mentioned at the start that everybody's going to have different use cases, right? And kind of pulling it back a little bit, when you're looking at evaluating a solution like this, it's really important to understand what your organization's priorities are, of course. Because if you try to look at it as one big, I have to solve absolutely every challenge here, it's going to seem almost insurmountable. I give the same advice when people ask me, well, how do I get zero trust in place? It's like, well, you got to kind of figure out what your priorities are and really focus on those as you kind of supplement that with maybe some of the other really important steps that you need to take care of, but aren't necessarily critically important to your organization. So as we go through these next few, I just want you to think about kind of what of these would help you do more. So the first thing I mentioned in the previous slide of what a CASB should enable you to do is gaining visibility into cloud user and data activities. But to take this a step further, if you can get those unified insights across all users, all apps, and all devices, then you can really be sure that none of those are slipping through the cracks. And we'll talk a little bit about this in the next slide, but that really becomes important when you have a wide variety of devices that your users are accessing data from. And that could be managed and unmanaged devices. Maybe you issue some devices as corporate devices, but you allow people to use personal smartphones or something like that. Maybe you've got a mix of operating systems out there. One of the biggest challenges in general with cloud these days is that you have so many different device types that are accessing this data that you need to be able to understand exactly what it means when one accesses data versus the other, and how to understand the risk posture of each type of device and be able to pull that all in. So again, being able to do this all kind of in one integrated platform is a key, and that's how you know you're getting that plus there. That's kind of why I noted this with the little plus in the bold. It's like this is really where you're not just going to get kind of the minimal value, but you're really going to be able to make sure that you're staying ahead of these attackers, building up that arsenal a little bit, making sure that you're fully defended. Now, the next one is implementing and centralizing adaptive access controls, and I mentioned this a little bit in the previous slide, but the real differentiator here, and keep in mind that these points are based on what Gartner suggests as well. They go pretty in depth with some of their evaluation tools, and one of the things they highlight is to really, if you really want to make sure that you're fully covered, it's making sure that this CASB can integrate directly with a mobile threat defense solution with an MTD. Making sure that it understands, the CASB can understand through signals from the mobile device if that device and user is safe enough or secure enough to access the infrastructure. So, making sure that you're only giving authorized users access to data with these conditional access policies, really for any cloud-based app or resource, and taking into account, again, the risk posture of the user or device, regardless of what type of device is, and most importantly, if it is on a mobile device, that's really where you're getting that differentiated capability. Now, the next one here has to do with DLP, right? We all know that DLP is important, but DLP has evolved a lot in the last 5 or 10 years. This is really where encryption and digital rights management, or DRM, really come into play here. What type of insight are you getting into the type of data that your users are accessing, but also what type of proactive measures can you put in place? Can the CASB help you put in place to automatically identify and encrypt that data as it's being accessed? Now, this is really important, and it's pretty tricky because there's a lot of times there's a lot of manual work that goes into this. But if you have things built in where it automatically identifies the patterns of things like social security numbers, other government ID numbers, credit card numbers, patient data, whatever it may be, these are all things that tend to follow a pattern, and with advanced encryption engine behind it, it can automatically encrypt that data so that in the chance that something gets shared outside of your network or outside of kind of the approved users that can access that data, it's automatically protected, and you don't risk falling out of alignment with compliance, and making sure that you continue to have visibility into that data and what's being done with it, where it's going, even after it's left the infrastructure. So this is really that encryption and digital rights management part is key. And one more thing to add is that if that can go, if that goes beyond just an email or a text doc or something like that, and can see it within images or PDFs or any file type, that's really when you know you've got something that's going to keep you in line with those compliance standards. Now, this one is interesting because we're talking about protecting against malware entering SaaS and IaaS apps, right? And the plus here is user and entity behavior analytics. And at first glance, maybe you're saying, well, are those two things really aligned? And in my opinion, they are. I really think they are. I think that the number one thing that once malware, if it's able to get into your infrastructure, a lot of times it starts to behave, and it starts to behave in a certain way, or it takes over. A lot of times this happens where a legitimate account gets compromised, and suddenly one of your users is behaving differently, or a device gets infected with malware, and when it connects into the infrastructure, all of a sudden there's all this activity happening from that user or device that doesn't normally happen. So having the insight into what the baseline of that user or device's behavior is, and then being able to understand what is anomalous, and that could go as far as just, it could be as simple as just accessing data it doesn't normally access, or being part of the infrastructure, or accessing, part of the infrastructure it doesn't normally go to, exfiltrating, downloading lots of data, suddenly having interest in where a lot of your sensitive client data is stored. These are all things that would be red flags where the malware may have gotten in, but now you've got the signals to be able to tell you that something's going on, and you can stop it before it does some serious damage. So as you go through this process, and it's like, all right, what do I need to ask a CASB vendor? So first one here, how do you help me identify how data moves between sanctioned and unsanctioned apps? This is a big one for that shadow IT problem that I was talking about before. How can I be sure that the same zero trust policies are being applied across my users, apps, and devices? Again, looking back, extending those uniform policies, having that level of governance across all of your apps and all of your data is key. And this should be, understanding how they do that, and understanding if it aligns with your organization's kind of risk tolerance and posture, and the way that you tend to evaluate these things. It's a really important part. Third one here is how can you help me remain compliant and implement DLP policies? How deep do your encryption capabilities go? Again, talking about how DLP is important, but how it's really evolved over the last decade or so. You really want to make sure that you're getting the type of insight into data where it goes just beyond those basic levels. You want to make sure that data can be encrypted, regardless of what type of file it's in. That DLP policies can go far beyond just your standard upload and download, and really understand all types of behavior for data movement in order to mitigate the risk of a data leak. Fourth one here is, how will you enable me to continuously monitor the risk of all devices and users connecting to cloud resources? So this is really making sure that you get that full visibility, that you don't basically fall victim to one of the greatest benefits of the cloud, which is that people can access data from anywhere, but you don't want that to become your biggest problem at the same time, where you lose that visibility, you lose that control that you do need in order to make sure that your organization is staying safe and compliant. And then finally, how do you mitigate the risk of unauthorized users downloading or sharing data governed by compliance? And I'd actually expand this out. I'd say of unauthorized or even authorized users. Compliance data is valuable, and it's something that you don't want being shared out broadly. So really making sure that that you have a way to keep an eye on that type of data. This even ties back to that encryption and DLP policy point. These are all really kind of intertwined in a way where they should give you an idea of whether the organization or the solution provider you're talking to is able to really kind of take that extra step for you in order to enable you to really take full advantage of what a CASB can offer you. So looking at some of the key takeaways here, some of the challenges that we've talked about, really just boiling them down into three main points here. Look, cloud infrastructure is getting more complex every day, and it's causing every organization to have issues with visibility and really understanding where data is moving and how it's handled. The second one here, obviously, work from home isn't going anywhere, right? Securing your remote workforce, requires truly a fundamentally new or fundamentally modern approach to security and to enablement, as reliance on cloud apps and services just continues to grow and get more complex every day. So as this complexity grows, it becomes even more difficult to monitor users and devices and really make sure that they're not introducing any additional security threats into your infrastructure or intentionally or unintentionally stealing or leaking data. So, the best way to do this, the best way to ensure data compliance and security is to, identify a CASB that has that advanced DLP engine behind it, can help you extend zero trust policies to every user, regardless of the device they're on, and really make sure it aligns with what you and your team are looking for. Really want to make sure that you're not getting caught up in just what they say is the best thing, but really what aligns with what your team's looking for, and really helping you embrace the full advantage of what the cloud can offer, and doing so securely and doing so in a way that really enables your employees rather than hinders them and creates more friction when they're trying to get access to the data that they need. So I think that is everything here. Check out lookout.com. We've got lots of stuff on there. I believe that everyone who attends today will receive a couple of pieces of collateral, more on CASB. But yeah, let's jump back here, and happy to take any questions.
Well, very good, Hank. Thanks so much for your presentation. As promised, we have the opportunity to take some questions now from the audience. Reminder to attendees, if you haven't submitted your questions, you still can by the chat window on your screen. We will not get to every question, but those that we don't answer in the course of this session, we'll get responses back to you via email. That said, first question, Hank, how does the CASB differ from security built into my cloud apps?
Great question. So that's what I touched on a little bit earlier. Really, when it comes to kind of unifying those policies across all those applications. Now, there's kind of a the tough thing with a lot of SaaS and infrastructure apps is that there's a shared responsibility model where you as the user of the platform or of the app is responsible for the data within it, kind of beyond a certain level. So if the service provider gets breached, they are not responsible for your data loss, and that's the case with a lot of things. The great thing with the CASB is that it's going to enable you to make sure that across the board you kind of have this singular. Again, this goes back to where your organization kind of decides, all right, what's our approach going to be? What's our risk tolerance? How are we going to handle things, data access, data movement, and it just really helps create a more uniform approach to all of it, and really helps reduce that complexity, as you embrace more of these apps and platforms.
Next question. Can the CASB control access from managed and unmanaged devices?
It should be able to, yeah. That's one of those things that if you want to make sure that you're going to be fully covered, that is 100% a question you should ask. I should actually probably add that to that slide that I have there of what questions should you ask, because there is kind of this fine line between security and end user privacy. You want to be sure that you're securing your users as much as possible, but you don't want to do so in a way that invades their privacy. So when it comes to unmanaged devices, a lot of organizations have difficulty kind of towing that line. So really good question to ask the CASB vendor. How do you secure access from from unmanaged devices. In my experience, the best way is to make sure that they have both a forward and reverse proxy approach in a way that they're able to do an agentless deployment and agentless protection of all devices and users.
Here's one more question. How do you enforce various or separate policies against multiple cloud instances?
So I would say that depends on the product that you're looking at. I think that in an ideal world, what you're able to do is, as you're building these policies, basically be able to select which apps or which platforms they're going to apply to. And I think I'm answering this right. And when it comes to maybe different types of like one, let's just say GDPR versus HIPAA, making sure that you apply those policies to the right places and the right data. Again, if you can, the best way to be able to do that is really be able to select where all of this, where these policies are being applied and how those kind of the encryption policies, DLP policies are being put into action when a user, maybe accesses data they shouldn't or tries to exfiltrate something that's sensitive.
Well, very good, Hank. That is all the time we have today. Thank you again for your time, for your presentation, especially for answering these questions. To our attendees, thank you for taking time out of your day to attend this session. We are grateful for that, and I do trust that today's discussion provided some valuable new insights to enable you and your organization to be even better prepared to tackle the CASB conversations you've got in your future. I look forward to seeing you again at one of our upcoming events. Until then, for Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thanks so much for your time and attention today.